Chapter 43. Treadon Nelson. Jaren and Treadon burst through the door to Xander Caliban's office at the same time. Treadon's heart pounded so hard he could feel it knock against his ribs. Jaren wasn't even breathing hard. He stood with his back straight, taking in the scene in front of him. There was a black table in the middle of the office, the floor cracked and broken around the solid slab like it had risen straight through the floor. It was made of the same black stone as the foyer, golden flecks swirling down and away from the form that was tied to the top of the stone slab like a sacrifice on an old-fashioned altar. Ellie lay bound by her ankles and wrists, pinned down to the slab. She fought against the restraints, lifting her head to spit at the man standing over her. Xander Caliban looked like a different person. His face was emotionless, the wax impression they'd seen earlier, but now it looked like the wax had been kept in a hot room. His features had sagged, one eye drooping almost to his cheekbone. One of Xander's hands hovered over Ellie's left forearm. Her skin there was boiling, bubbling, like a pot over high heat. She screamed again as his hand got closer to her arm, the skin liquefying, a white bone rising up through her skin. "Dad!" Jaren moved before Treadon registered the whole scene. The glass walls reflected the haunting light that flowed away from Ellie's body on the altar. The whole scene bounced back off the glass as Jaren ran at his dad, hitting him full force with his shoulder. There was a crack, rock hitting rock, as Jaren hit his father like a crash test dummy car hits a wall. Xander didn't move. The impact barely affected him as Jaren slumped to the ground, holding his shoulder. The only effect was a slight jerk as Xander's hand pulled away from Ellie's arm. The white bone jerked free and fell to the floor with a metallic clang. Ellie's body jerked with a seizure-like motion, and then she lay still. It wasn't a bone. It was a long, white dagger. "Ellie." Treadon moved forward. Ellie lifted her head, looking at him. Instead of the pain he expected to see, he saw a deep determination. Xander Caliban bent over, reaching for the dagger that had fallen. Treadon's mind cleared. Energy flooded through his body. It was the same way he'd felt in the locker room the day he fought Bridger Michaels. It was the way he felt when he thought of helping Ellie, of keeping her safe, his body and mind in complete alignment. One purpose. The glowing light swirled and shifted around Jaren. He rose to his hands and knees and dove for the dagger, knocking it from Xander Caliban's fingertips. Treadon tackled Xander from behind. He buried his shoulder into the midsection of Xander. The impact from Treadon threw Xander off his feet, and the two of them slid across the floor, away from Ellie. Xander pushed Treadon off with incredible force. Treadon managed to land on his feet. Xander rose to face him, seeming taller than a moment before. Even with the distorted wax features, pure rage shone through Xander's eyes. Treadon's stomach clenched and fear closed his throat, his mouth as dry as a desert sand dune. Jaren recovered the white dagger and made his way back to the altar. He cut the rope that held Ellie's wrist to the stone. Treadon ducked as Xander swung a punch. Treadon returned the favor by burying his fist in Xander's ribcage. Xander curled into the force, and Treadon brought his other fist around in an uppercut, catching Xander in the jaw. A normal man would have been out for the count, a knockout, but Xander only stumbled backward a few steps. Xander looked at Treadon with bewilderment. He was confused, not injured. That didn't bode well. Xander reached out and put his hands around Treadon's neck, squeezing. Treadon's vision went blurry as he tried to pry Xander's fingers off. And then Jaren was there, with Xander's office chair. He swung the chair and slammed it into the back of Xander's head. Xander released his grip and stumbled back. Ellie had the dagger and was cutting her feet free. "You mess with his girlfriend. That's what happens when you make Treadon Nelson angry." Jaren was breathing hard, like the walk across the room had winded him. How could Jaren run 5 floors without a pause, but now seemed out of breath? Xander shook his head. His eyes looked hungrily past them toward Ellie and the white dagger. He pulled both hands back and then shoved them forward. He wasn't close enough to touch them, but a force of wind hit them both in the chest and sent them hurtling backward. They slid across the floor and hit the altar where Ellie was still cutting herself free. "He's as hard as a rock and as strong as a gorilla." Jaren rubbed his shoulder where he'd hit Xander. "Are you okay? You're usually more creative with your similes." "I'll give you some creative language." Jaren bent over his knees with a groan before he could show Treadon his more creative curse words. "Oh, this stupid headache feels like my skull is splitting in half. I guess that's not a huge concern if we're going to be dying in the next few minutes." Treadon helped Jaren get to his feet. Ellie worked on the last rope, holding her right hand. Xander regarded them like flies on the wall, as if the man was debating whether to swat them with a fly swatter or crush them with his bare hands. Xander's suit was crumpled, the white shirt hanging out, his breaths coming heavy, not from exertion, but from a passionate rage. Treadon felt like a David facing a Goliath, except Treadon didn't even have a stone to throw. Ellie had the dagger that had been ripped from her arm, and she swung it up toward Xander as he approached them. The tip of the dagger cut a long gash across Xander's cheek. The cut turned black, a foul-smelling smoke rising from the wound. Xander shoved Treadon one way and Jaren the other, and he caught Ellie's wrist. Twisting the dagger from her grip, he held her arm down to the altar. Treadon regained his balance and made eye contact with Jaren. They would have to do this together. Jaren and Treadon hit Xander from both sides, knocking Xander forward, the dagger slicing across Ellie's stomach, cutting through her shirt, and ripping into her skin. Blood pooled on the top of the altar. Treadon hit the dagger's handle, knocking it out of Xander's hand and sending it spinning across the floor. He grabbed Xander's outstretched arm and twisted it behind his back, kicking Xander in the knee. Treadon expected more resistance after Jaren and Ellie's reactions to Xander, but the arm bent. Xander went down to one knee with a grunt. The whites of Xander's eyes were not visible. The pupil expanded to cover the entire eye, so it looked like a dark black hole. An unearthly growl rose from Xander's throat. "I can't stop the bleeding." Jaren had his hands on Ellie's stomach. "Can you heal?" Treadon asked. "I can't. I don't have the energy." Ellie's voice was weak. Her breathing labored. Her face was pale, her color draining out with the blood. Jaren took off his shirt and pressed it against Ellie's stomach. Xander struggled, but Treadon pushed him to the floor with his knee in Xander's back. The door flew inward, and 4 of the dog-like creatures stepped into the room, growling and snapping. "I think we're screwed." Jaren wasn't looking much better than Ellie. "I should have borrowed one of those swords from Conan." Ellie rolled off the altar, Jaren supporting her, but the dogs blocked the door. Xander whipped around, catching Treadon off balance, and shoved his hand against Treadon's chest. Treadon flew backward, colliding with Jaren and Ellie. They all crashed to the floor and slid across the room, stopping when they hit the far wall, made of glass. The creatures approached them. Ellie kept the shirt pressed against her stomach and raised one hand out toward the dogs. The room smelled of rot and burnt hair. The dogs slowed, shaking their heads against Ellie's attempt to influence their minds. Her hand shook in the air, and the creatures seemed to be able to shake off her influence as they started forward again. "Kill the ordinaries, but leave the descendants. She still has the second dagger." Xander straightened his suit coat. He climbed to his feet on the far side of the altar. "I have some choice last words for you," Jaren said, somehow managing to still sound arrogant. 4 demon dogs flexed their haunches, leaning back, baring their teeth, preparing to pounce. The creatures jumped. Ellie dove to the right. Treadon and Jaren dove to the left, landing behind Xander's huge oak desk. The creatures hit the glass with 4 solid thumps, followed by a squeaking sound as they slid down to the floor. It would only take a moment for them to recover, and the desk wasn't much cover from 4 demons with sharp claws and poisonous teeth. Ellie yelped as Xander picked her up by her hair and dragged her back to the altar. Treadon clenched his fists. He had felt helpless before, but never like this, with Ellie so close and yet so impossible to reach. The creature's claws scratched and screeched on the marble floor as they scrambled back to their feet and turned their sniffing snouts to where Treadon and Jaren crouched behind the huge wooden desk. Desperate for anything, Treadon opened a drawer on the desk and found a single pen. "Not my weapon of choice." Jaren shook his head. "I'm sorry I got you into this. I should have listened to Gabe. We should have waited. We would have been too late." "That's what I like about you. The kind of guy who wouldn't be tardy, even for his own demise." "We can't just hide here while he kills her. We have to do something." "You got a plan, hero?" Jaren asked. Treadon reflexively looked down at his arm where he kept his plays during a game. There was nothing there. No plan, no team. Too many enemies, and not enough offense. One of the creatures jumped on top of the desk, leering down at them. A drip of drool rolled down the creature's dangling tongue and landed on Treadon's forehead. The black slime burned his skin. He wiped it away. The creature leaned down as a second jumped up and joined its companion. Ellie yelled from across the room. Treadon could see that Xander had pinned her arm to the altar and had his hand hovering above it, the skin starting to boil. She kicked at Xander, but it looked like she contacted a concrete surface. Her leg crumpled against the force. Xander wasn't even fazed. Treadon gripped the pin in his hand. If Ellie was going to die, He wasn't going to watch it happen, hiding behind a desk.